You are listening to The Tatiana Show. This show may contain adult content, language, and humor and is intended for mature audiences. If that's not you, please stop listening. Nothing you hear on The Tatiana Show is intended as financial advice, legal advice, or really anything other than entertainment. Take everything you hear with a grain of salt. Oh, and if you're listening to us on an affiliate network, the ideas and views expressed on this show are not necessarily those of the network that you're listening on or of any sponsors or any affiliate products you may hear about on this show. Now that that's squared away, let's start the show. Hey there, it's time for the show, The Tatiana Show, where you make friends and talk life and crypto. This episode of The Tatiana Show is brought to you by Vaultoro. Vaultoro is a gold hedging solution for the crypto community. One of the challenges of investing in cryptocurrencies is dealing with volatility. Keeping a diversified portfolio is a key to healthy returns. I keep about 10% of my crypto assets in gold using Vaultoro. Vaultoro allows me to open a gold wallet in seconds where I can easily trade with cryptos and gold. What I like about using Vaultoro instead of Tether is that the gold in my Vaultoro wallet is insured, audited, vaulted in Switzerland, and unlike fiat money, gold has increased in value for the last 20 years. Visit vaultoro.gold/Tatiana today and get zero trading fees for the first 3 months. That is vault, like a gold vault, and oro, which is Spanish for gold. Vaultoro, ole! Hello, everybody, and welcome to this special edition of The Tatiana Show. Today, we're talking with Kat Murti, the executive director and co-founder of Feminists for Liberty. And we're going to be talking about a very contentious topic. It doesn't really have anything to do with crypto, but it does have to do with freedom, and it is a crazy topic. We're going to be talking abortion, and it's been in the news a lot lately, and my friend Kat has been posting a lot of interesting articles about it from a libertarian perspective. I would say maybe a left libertarian perspective. Some would maybe disagree with that. I don't know if Kat would agree or not. And, you know, I wanted to sort of explore this topic and see what's going on. People are talking about late-term abortions, and I don't think we've ever talked about it on the show. I know it's a little bit of a depressing thing, but Kat is pretty well informed on it, and I wanted to broach it a little bit. And so before we get started, I just wanted to say thank you to our sponsors, Vaultoro. Go to vaultoro.com if you want to do a gold Bitcoin exchange. They're an awesome company. They've been around forever. And then we've also got blocktap.io, and they will help you analyze your data. So cool companies, happy for their support on the Tatiana Show, which is now on Tuesdays, and the Proof of Love Show, which is the relationship show with a little crypto bend, is on Fridays. Proof of Love on Fridays. Check out Proof of Love Cast, like podcast, but lovecast.com, or go to thetatianashow.com and get some old episodes and all the newest episodes of The Tatiana Show. So welcome to the show, Kat. Thanks so much for joining me and being willing to talk about this, fiery topic.
Thanks so much for having me and for being willing to talk about this on your show.
I'm excited. I think that we should be able to discuss it. I mean, I don't know. I don't think anybody is like, oh man, I can't wait to kill the babies, pro-abortion. But, it'll be interesting to see where this goes. So how would you classify your position on abortion? And do you think that there is a traditional libertarian position?
Yeah, definitely. So first off, I want to address something that you said in the intro. I actually don't consider myself a left libertarian. And I think that this issue and some of the other ones that I work on, like feminism, the drug war, immigration, get sort of viewed as left libertarian. But the left-right spectrum is really about views on economic policy, speaking in terms of political science. And I am very, very far to the right when it comes to that. I'm super capitalist, free markets and everything. But to talk about abortion in particular, I'm personally am pro-life. However, I'm pro-choice when it comes to other people's decisions on abortion or other such things. My organization, Feminists for Liberty, we actually say that we are anti-statism and anti-sexism, pro-markets, and pro-choice in everything. And abortion, of course, is a part of that. So for me, how I view it is I think that it's a very tough decision that people come to sometimes. And I would like to create a world in which it is a decision that fewer people feel like they have to make. That said, I don't think that it's the role of the state to stop people from having abortions. And I would absolutely never want to see increased abortion restrictions or even a lot of the restrictions we have on reproductive freedom in general. Now that I'm sure we'll get into a little bit more, some of the causes of abortion when it comes to access to things like birth control and ability for people to make some of their own choices around this. And, you know, my position, I think, is actually pretty consistent from a libertarian perspective. You know, the Libertarian Party, since it was founded in the 70s, one of the big consensus issues that they started on was the fact that they supported a right to abortion in a way that neither the Republicans or the Democrats did. The way I view it is it's a property rights issue. I own my body, and all other rights come from the fact that I have a fundamental property right in my body. And so, yeah, I don't think that the state should be able to tell me what I do with that. This issue is so politicized. People tend to view it as if everybody is radically pro-life or radically pro-choice, or really the way that people see it is that people are either against women's right to self-ownership or they're in favor of killing babies. And very, very few people are on either one. In fact, the vast majority of Americans kind of fall in line with where abortion laws currently are. That's sort of where they feel about it. In general, most Americans do consider themselves pro-life to some extent and are also in favor of abortion not being illegal. And so I think, like, when we hear from people, we usually hear from people who are the radicals, the people who are the most invested in making this a political issue. And it also gets sort of treated as a political football for the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, but that's not really how most Americans feel about this issue.
Yeah, I would say so. What do you think about the late-term abortion? Because now they're kind of talking about that all the time, but then reading into it a little bit further, there's sometimes really is a medical need for it. The problem being that it could be abused, right? They could say, oh, it'll hurt her brain because a girl didn't want to have a kid anymore. And people say, oh, that would never happen. But I don't know. I think it would. I think people could totally do crazy stuff like that. Do you have any thoughts on the whole late-term debate currently?
Sure, definitely. I think that late-term debate largely comes from, again, this sort of politicization of it. Because most people, in fact, I would argue the vast majority of people who do have those late-term abortions, that was a very wanted baby. People don't go through 8 or 9 months of pregnancy, which is life-altering, is body-altering, will physically change your body for the rest of your life in many different ways. I mean, everything from stretch marks to not being able to taste the same way, to having your bone structure change and the size of your feet change and potentially getting diabetes and all sorts of other things. Most people don't do that and then decide on a whim, actually, you know what, I don't want to have this baby. That's not usually what happens. The vast majority of these late-term abortions are a very wanted baby that they then found out has something like is going to be born without a heart or without a brain or has something like Tay-Sachs disease and is going to die a slow and painful death over the course of its first year or so of life. That's usually what ends up happening in these late-term abortions. In fact, even though we discuss them as if people are deciding last minute, there's very few doctors. I think there's 4 doctors, I believe. I believe there used to be 5, and now there's 4 because one of them was murdered by an anti-abortion activist, but it could be 4 and then 3. I'm pretty sure there's 4 doctors in this entire country who will do elective late-term abortions, and you're talking about tens of thousands of dollars. So
Wow.
Just in terms of market, that's not going to happen. You know, we're libertarians who believe in markets. Like, there isn't a market for this. Yeah, so I think that, like, the reason that we discuss it is because it's something that sounds so horrific. It's something that is easily politicized.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think, for example, of the lady who had the baby? This is like a weird case that's just going and making the rounds. So there's a woman who was 5 months pregnant, and she started a fight with her boyfriend's like girlfriend or something. They had like some kind of a fight, and she was 5 months pregnant, and she started the fight. And then the girl that she fought, shot her in the stomach and killed the baby. And I don't know all the details exactly. So, you know, fix me if you know more than I do. But apparently the girl who did the shooting didn't get into any trouble, but the woman who had the baby, she was arrested or she's being tried for manslaughter because she put her baby into harm's way. So that's kind of like a thing that politically is getting thrown around because people are saying, oh, well, I don't know. It's just kind of a weird take that they're looking at it from, like, I guess the quote unquote feminist perspective. I don't know. I saw people referring to this like Handmaid's Tale, but I don't know. What do you think about that? Does that have anything to do with this? And then also, like, why is that manslaughter? Well, if you're like, that's baby, but if it's 5 months and you electively get rid of it, it's not a baby. You know what I mean? That's kind of like an unusual thing, the way that it's treated in the law.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that this is sort of a result of personhood amendments and this idea that, you know, a baby is a full person, and this mother, she was actually charged with manslaughter because she was shot in the stomach. And yeah, I think that that's absolutely dehumanizing, this idea that this woman who really wanted this baby, I mean, I don't think she wanted this baby to be murdered, and she was attacked violently. Like, yes, maybe.
But she started the fight.
She started in the fight, sure, but
why start a fight if you've got a baby in there? I mean, that's probably a bad call.
I mean, maybe, but let's say that you start an argument in a bar, Tatiana. Like, let's say that someone, I don't know that what caused you to start the fight, but maybe someone comes up to you, you've had a few drinks and someone comes up and they call you some names, maybe they grab your purse or something, and then you start a fight with them and they shoot you. Would it be your fault? Right. I mean like, if you, well, I don't know. I mean, I think that
if I start a fight with them, isn't that my fault? Why am I starting a fight with people?
Why are they shooting someone in the belly? I mean, I think that there's
both things are bad.
An escalation issue too, right? Yeah, I mean, I think this is absolutely dehumanizing, and it is related to abortion because it's this idea that the baby's personhood. The quote actually that I think came from, I'm trying to remember what exactly the quote came from, but from the police department. I can't remember the exact quote, but it was something along the lines of, "There's only one victim in this case. It was the unborn baby." Of course, the woman who got shot is also a victim in this case, no matter what amount of blame you want to place on her. I mean, she lost her child. And I think, like, you asked, what is the difference between a baby that is aborted and a baby that isn't? And I think it's honestly the fact that, well, it was a wanted baby and it's inside this person's body and they're trying to have this baby. I think that means something in a way that it doesn't as much the other way. It's also like 5 months. That's pretty late. That would be, you can't get an abortion in most states at that point anyway. So that would be, she couldn't abort that baby if she wanted to. This is someone who wanted that baby. But I think this case is a very sensationalized case, right? I think because it's so horrific. But it's also, it tells you a lot about what these personhood amendments have done. There are women in prison right now because they had a miscarriage. And it was viewed that they did something that may have caused them to have a miscarriage. They lost their child. They had one of the most painful experiences that a lot of people experience, both physically and emotionally. And the first thing that happens is they get taken to prison and they have to prove they didn't do something to cause this to happen. I think that's horrific. And I think that that's a serious concern. And it's happened over and over again. And it's only going to get worse as we see laws like the law in Alabama or Georgia or Ohio continue to pass.
That's an interesting approach, but I just don't think that
we can talk about before abortion was legal, right? People have been having abortions for all of human history, but they did become illegal at some point. And, you know, in this past century, at the time that our grandmothers were younger women, it was not uncommon for women who were having, it did happen sometimes that women who were having miscarriages would be, before they could be helped medically, before they could be cleaned up, before anything like that could happen, police would come in and talk to them and make sure that it wasn't a self-induced abortion. And this is while potentially bleeding out.
Yeah, we don't want to turn back into those days. But what about the rights of the unborn? I mean, I don't think that you can make a baby a person based on your opinion. You know what I mean? Like, you're either a person or a human being or you're not. And
Sure.
like, my opinion of whether or not, like, you can look at an old person and they're in a vegetative state, like they're still a human being, even though they might not be used,ful. I don't know. It's like,
absolutely. But it's worth mentioning, the law does say that people who experience brain death and are on life support, those people can be euthanized. And so it's not that different to look at a baby or a fetus in the same way, legally speaking. Now I did tell you I'm personally pro-life. I mean, my own views on the subject, I might see it as baby, but I think that when you view these babies as somehow having more personhood or more rights as the woman that they're inside of, that's when we have the problem. That's when these problems come about, which is fundamentally what you're talking about.
I mean, aren't they allowed to, I feel like her inconvenience is significantly less than their death. Like their death is worse than her being inconvenienced for a while. And we're not talking about rape cases because rape is like a whole other animal, whatever.
So people talk about things like rape and incest exceptions, but the problem with rape and incest exceptions when you talk about abortion bans is they're essentially unenforceable. What exactly would you do so let's imagine that we live in a world where abortion is illegal and you get raped and you are pregnant now and you want to have an abortion. Well, abortion is illegal. However, it's allowed for rape. But your standard rape case is going to take 2 years before it goes to trial, and then at least another year, up to 3 years before you get to a conviction. So you're talking about anywhere from 2 years to 5 years before you know if that's a rape or not. So what happens, legally speaking, just to know if your abortion would be legal? So what exactly are you asking? Are you asking that women have the abortion, stay in prison for 2 to 5 years until they're able to prove their innocence in the matter? Are we saying that, well, no, you have the baby anyway, and then when that baby's 4 years old, 5 years old, then you can get a hearing that says, okay, you would have been legally allowed to abort that baby? I think that rape and incest exceptions sound good and they make people feel better about themselves, but generally speaking, they're unenforceable.
Wow. Yeah, that's a really good point.
Unenforceable laws are bad laws. And those are some things that I think libertarians fundamentally are against.
Yeah. Well, I was talking with my aunt also about it. And we even talked about a little bit about assisted suicides for people who are sick, if they're terminal. And I was like, yeah, why not? Let them kill themselves if they need to. And she was saying, yeah, but what about the commercial influence? So if you have a country like Canada, for example, where the government is paying for all of your stuff or your healthcare, or even if you have a private company like you have in the US, what if they now start having different kinds of incentives? They say, okay, well, it would be, you're going to die anyway, so we just might as well kill you now. Or your baby, I feel like I'm opening up a can of worms, but like, oh, your baby's going to have Down syndrome. We don't need this baby. It's fine. You're not even going to like it anyway. We'll just kill it too. And all of a sudden the state, because it's already been involved, is now making these decisions from like the insurance company's perspective of trying to save money.
Right. So that would be a good argument against state-run healthcare. I certainly agree with you. And I mean, like the Down syndrome issue, I mean, that is sort of something that's come about. Iceland and France have both sort of made national headlines for quote unquote curing Down syndrome. The way that they've done that is that most Down syndrome babies are aborted before they're born. Now, I personally, I think that that's kind of hateful. I think that there are lots of lovely people with Down syndrome in the world, and I don't think that the world would be a better place if they weren't allowed to live. But I also don't think that the alternative is to make it illegal. I think it's worth mentioning that, we're libertarians. I think we should hopefully be able to understand that the solution to I don't like something or I want someone not to do something isn't bringing the state. It's worth mentioning that abortion is actually becoming significantly less common in the world at large and in our country. They're at their lowest rate right now since Roe v. Wade was passed in the 70s, and they were down 24% just between 2006 and 2015. That's not because of the law. That's because we're creating a world in which it's easier to be a poor mother, a single mother, where women are able to have more economic freedom, more economic agency. They're able to support themselves. They're able to support their children, and they're not facing things that they were previously. That's how we solve this. That's, I think, how you can be pro-life from a libertarian perspective. You build a world in which it's easier for people to choose not to have abortions. You don't bring in the state with its guns and force people to have babies that they don't want and that they feel like they can't take care of.
Yeah, absolutely. Although I do feel like there's a certain dehumanization element of the babies with this whole abortion debate raging out. You know, it's almost like shout your abortion. I've heard that as an expression. I don't know. It doesn't sound like something you should be shouting about.
I understand where it comes from. I think it's sort of a reactionary impulse to the fact that people act as if having an abortion makes you an awful, terrible person. And, you know, a lot of women have had abortions. Roughly 1 in 4 women in this country have had an abortion for whatever reason, whether it was a needed abortion, medically speaking, or some other reason. I don't know. I don't wish to delve into that. But I understand where they're coming from with just understanding that when you talk about people as in a certain way, you're overlooking the fact that you almost certainly, I'm using the universal you, I don't mean you, Tatiana, but I mean the kinds of people who shame women for having abortions, who, by the way, are often the same people who shame women for being single mothers. Those people are overlooking the fact that probably many of their loved ones have faced these decisions as well, and maybe might have made a different decision, I would think, if they knew that they were going to have community support, if they knew that they were going to be able to get a job, if they knew that they were able to continue their education, if they knew that they were going to have people in their community who are helping them out and supporting them and all of those kinds of things. I think that's a big part of this.
Isn't that not taking responsibility for those acts that created the baby in the first place? I mean, sure, you know, it'd be nice to have help from everybody else, but is everybody else obligated to help you? I mean, as humans, we should want to, but that shouldn't be the caveat in order to have the baby. I mean, I guess if you want to have good outcomes, sure.
Sure. I mean, you're not obligated to help anyone else. That is true. Should you? Yeah, I think so. And I think that so we're talking about it. Yes, of course, you are not obligated to help anyone else, period. But if you want other people to do something, in this case, have a baby, you do need to create a world in which it is easier for people to have babies. The reason that the abortion rate is falling now is because it's okay to be a single mother. It was not always okay to be a single mother. We put people in prison for being a single mother. We sterilized people. We did all sorts of really awful things in this country and in other countries because people got pregnant. And it's worth mentioning, too, you know, it takes two to tango. A lot of this responsibility is viewed as solely the mother's. And I mean, there's another person who is involved too, who frequently does not face the same level of public shaming that people direct at mothers.
Well, but it's all about the woman's choice. Those guys, I agree with you that they should be held accountable. It's like, hey guys, you know, get it together, get some better condoms or whatever. But at the same time, a lot of times they're not allowed to even participate in the my body, my choice thing.
Well, it's because it's not their body. That's basically fundamentally it. They're not having the baby. Now, I will say, from a libertarian feminist perspective, people say, well, men don't get a choice on whether or not they want to be a parent. Now, I would say men should have a right to waive parental rights, and that's whenever they should be allowed to do that. The deadline should be roughly 2 weeks to a month, not sure the exact amount of time, before whatever the legal ban is on having an abortion.
So you would say that the dad has to say it's okay or not? Let's say I'm knocked up. No. The dad says, you got to have it. What would you say is the solution there?
That's just as awful. Forced pregnancy, forced abortion, forced sterilization, these are all bad because of the force, right? No, I don't think that a man should be able to tell a woman that she has to have an abortion. What I'm saying is, I do think that men who do not want to have children with someone whom they have impregnated should have the right to waive all parental rights. And I think that they should be able to do so with a long enough period before whatever the legal limit is to have an abortion, so that if
she can set it up.
Right. Yes, exactly. If that is the decision that the mother wants to do, knowing that the father of the baby has decided to waive all legal rights, will not have any rights to the baby, and will not participate in any way in raising it, including child support, etc.
Well, I think that the 3 months logistically might be a little bit tough because you sometimes don't know for a month, and then you have to still set up the appointment. So I'm not even sure logistically it would work. I'm not really keen on the idea of men not having the ability to have that child brought to term. I hear what you're saying about it being weird to force the woman to have it if she doesn't want to have it, but I mean, she participated in it.
Threaten her life. I mean, this is her whole
life.
Why
a threat to her life? Maybe she should have not had sex with somebody and gotten pregnant.
You're essentially saying that sex should come with a death penalty. because
Why is
people
that
do.
a death penalty?
Pregnancy frequently is a death penalty. It's not a death penalty now, for the most part, because we have a lot of great medical technology, which unfortunately it's difficult to talk about, but includes abortion. That's a big part of the reason why women don't die in childbirth. It used to be incredibly common. For the longest time, women who were going to have babies would get all of their affairs in order with the expectation that they were going to die. It's entirely based upon modern medicine, which does include abortion, that women don't die in childbirth nearly as often as they used to. It used to be much more of the norm for women to die than not to die having a child. But even if they don't, I mean, it permanently changes your body. A lot of people have all sorts of issues. Frequently, you're talking about loss of income for months at a time. You're talking about all sorts of things, all of which, that's a huge imposition on a human body. Yeah, I definitely feel for men who feel like they wanted to have a child and their partner didn't want to have a child. But I do think that, unfortunately, fundamentally, the burden is, the physical burden is not shared in the same way by a father as it is by a mother, at least during pregnancy. And so that's a huge consideration that we have to think about, and this is part of the reason why people should really discuss these things before they start a relationship with someone, before they do that. If you don't want your partner to have an abortion, you should probably not have sex with someone who would have an abortion. These should be those types of discussions you have, but the response is not to say that you have the right to essentially enslave someone for 9 months, possibly longer, because you want to have a baby. There's so many other people out there who will have a baby with you.
Right. But I mean, if you already made one, I don't know. I'm taking it back to the woman, because the woman is the one who is the vessel, right? And I understand that it's, I think that, okay, death, the risk has been mitigated. So I'm not really that concerned about that. So we'll take that one out. I don't know. I just feel like she knew that by having sex, you might have a baby, and it's inconvenient if you have a baby and you don't want one. So I think, like, sure, sometimes the condom breaks. I do not think that is the majority of unwanted pregnancies. I think it's just people being irresponsible. So why shouldn't they pay those consequences, even if they are dire, because the consequence of death is much worse?
I'm not sure I really understood what you were saying.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just saying, like, if I'm a girl and I know that I can get pregnant, yeah, it sucks. I'm going to, like, it would be inconvenient. I might lose income, blah, blah, but there is a solution that's just don't have sex with people and don't get pregnant. I don't think that a majority of the people are broken condom people.
So do you think that people should never have sex unless they want to have a child?
I think that they should take precautions not to have a child.
Yeah, sure. People should take precautions, but sometimes other things happen. There's various causes. Yeah, people get pregnant even on birth control, even with everything else. Yes, definitely. It would be really good if every child, every pregnancy that ever happened was wanted and planned. Most of them aren't. In fact, over 50% of pregnancies in the US right now are unwanted. People still have those babies and then they're quite happy with them, but they were unwanted and unplanned in the first place. So I think this idea that, like, every one of those pregnancies ends in abortion is not at all true, because you're talking about people who are having children, and most of them did not want to have the child in the first place. So most people are making that choice anyway. Again, like, at the end of the day, this just comes down to, like, yes, you and I can have our views about what we would do, or anyone else, but at the end of the day, it's not our decision to make over someone else. And in any other topic, in any other thing, I don't think any libertarian would say it was your decision to make for someone else. So it's this issue, I think, that gets so politicized. I also want to bring it back to something else you said earlier. A lot of people don't know that they're pregnant for quite a long time. I think that, as we've been talking about a lot of the abortion legislation that's been happening in this country lately, a lot of the abortion bills that have been discussed and other legislation, we've heard about things like, for instance, a 6-week abortion ban, meaning you can't have an abortion after 6 weeks, or a heartbeat ban. And those are essentially full-on abortion bans. That's a complete abortion ban, because when people hear 6 weeks pregnant, what they understand oftentimes is, oh, you've known that you were pregnant for 6 weeks. That's not actually how it works. It's 6 weeks pregnant means you've missed your period if you have a normal length an average length cycle, menstrual cycle, then you've missed your period by roughly 1 to 2 weeks. So you've only just started to suspect you might be pregnant. At 6 weeks, 6 weeks is roughly the first time that you can take a pregnancy test and have it tell you if you're pregnant. You don't know if you're pregnant till that point. If you're one of the many women who has a longer cycle or irregular cycle, you probably don't know at all and have no idea that you're pregnant. Similarly, the heartbeat bin, so that's the idea that roughly around 6 weeks, again, there starts to be what we describe as a fetal heartbeat. And so that's basically, for the first time, you take that pregnancy test. It's been about a week, 2 weeks since you were due for your period. You're starting to think you might be pregnant. You take the test. It shows that you might be pregnant. You go to the doctor, and then they schedule an ultrasound because they don't know if you're pregnant yet. This is about 6 weeks. They're not sure. They schedule an ultrasound at that point, and at that point, they're not even sure yet, but on the ultrasound, they might be able to pick up what's considered a fetal heartbeat. So when people hear that, they're like, oh, it's a fully formed heart. There's no fully formed heart at that point. It's just the point at which you're able to pick up electrical currents coming from the forming baby, but there's no heart. The baby doesn't have a heart at that point.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
They totally use that. I mean, this is really like great points being brought up for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that like those kinds of things, because this is such a politicized issue, people kind of speak about it in these ways that aren't at all scientific and don't reflect anything of what pregnancy is actually like. And I think you're right. This is a really heated issue because it's so emotional. But it's important to understand, too, where other people are coming from and what those experiences are. And certainly, I think it's a big concern when the people legislating on these topics clearly either don't understand the basic science of reproduction, or they're willfully manipulating people to get them to believe that something else is happening. If you ask a OBGYN when a baby's heart actually forms, it's much closer to 12 to 20 weeks is when you see an actual heart, which is significantly past those 6 weeks. That heartbeat, the so-called fetal heartbeat, is not actually from the heart. That's just like the first sign that you can confirm that there is a pregnancy, and not any of the other things that could potentially cause a positive pregnancy test that early in a pregnancy, where you could have just gotten pregnant a week or two before at that point when you're talking about 6 weeks pregnant.
How do you think that race factors into this? Because the origins of Planned Parenthood, not everybody knows, but Margaret Sanger apparently was quite racist. It was used historically as a way of sterilizing the African-American population. Apparently, since Roe versus Wade, there's been 58 million abortions in this country. 18 million of them are African-American women. And obviously, African-American people make up a smaller portion of the society population. So what do you think about that aspect?
I think it's a bit of a red herring, to be honest. Now, to be fair, yes, Margaret Sanger, she, like many other progressives of her era, were eugenicists and they were racists, and they had an idea of the master race. And this was very much a big concern of theirs. Similarly, it wasn't just women of color. It was also, for instance, I mentioned previously, single mothers were frequently jailed and sterilized by the U.S. government because being a single mother was a sign that you were of ill repute and they didn't want you to have more children, for instance, right? So I think that certainly was a part of this. It's also worth mentioning forced sterilization continues to happen in this country. In other countries, our government has helped fund thousands of forced sterilizations in India and other countries. Here in the U.S., it's still very much the case that many women who are pregnant and in prison, and it's worth mentioning here, for various reasons, racialized policing being one of them, that people in prison do tend to be Black and brown. Many women were sterilized when they had their baby in prison, even though they asked for it not to happen or they didn't give any consent for it.
Wow.
That is still very common in this country. The government of Canada is currently being sued because they for a policy of forcibly sterilizing First Nations women. They're what they call Native Americans in Canada, who gave birth in hospitals and then were told that they were either forcibly sterilized against their will, or told that their baby would be taken away from them if they were not sterilized. All of these things are still very much part and parcel of what's going on. I mean, we've heard many cases where women who are viewed to have lower IQs or things like that have also been pushed into this, into forced abortions, forced sterilizations, all of that. Yeah, so that is very much a concern. At the end of the day, the issue is not abortion. The issue is ownership over your own body, which historically and currently is something that is very tenuous for a lot of women. And so, yeah, I think that is very much a huge issue on both sides of this. And it's very much an issue for women. And it's very much for anybody who is in a position of less power, which unfortunately for historical reasons does tend to include a lot more non-white people. Even I know that we've briefly talked about immigration, not on this, but in the past, even in the detention centers, it's really horrific, some of the stuff that they've done. They say they're not able to keep track of who the parents of the children that they're separating from their parents are. So they have many children who they don't know who to give them back to. They didn't keep good records of that. But you know what they are keeping good records of? Menstrual cycles of the women in there, so they can figure out when they're likely to get pregnant, if they are pregnant, etc. That is creepy and disturbing for the state to be involved in things like that.
Wait, why do they know that? That's so strange. Like, why would they even have, and also stop losing babies, guys. Crazy.
Yeah, right.
But like, why would they even know what these women's menstrual cycles are? That's so strange. How would that even be collected?
Well, they're tracked. They're going to the bathroom. They presumably, I don't know how much access they have to menstrual products, but there's ways that they can keep track of these things. And yeah, it's really creepy. They are tracking their menstrual cycles.
Oh, I'm so happy to have them involved in that. I want to think a little bit about what are some solutions, and people are always talking about adoption. Do you have any clue around how popular that actually is, and like if it's really a viable option? Because I believe that it's not as easy as it sounds.
Yeah, I think that people say adoption because they understand it's a difficult issue and it makes them feel good. But the fact of the matter is there are hundreds of thousands of children right now who are in state care who want to be adopted, and no one is adopting them. No one is adopting these children. And so when you're saying adoption, you're saying someone should go through 8 to 10 months of pregnancy. It's not exactly 9 months. It's somewhere between 8 and 10 months. Potentially lost their job. They're now potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. They have a lot of medical issues. And then they lose this child. They give up this child. At this point, this child is most likely not going to be adopted. So what we're increasingly seeing actually is women are no longer, increasingly, American women are not choosing between abortion or adoption. What they're choosing between is raising the child as a single mother or abortion. And as I said, those abortion rates are going down largely because culturally it's becoming more okay for women to be single mothers. They're no longer banned from jobs. They're no longer potentially going to prison for it. They're not being shamed in as many of the same ways, although unfortunately that still happens a lot. It's also about economic freedom. Women are increasingly able to work. They're increasingly able to earn money, support their families, etc., in a way that they were not able to previously. And so those are the kinds of things that are actually helpful. Telling people, oh, just go through adoption, that's not really the same thing. That's a huge commitment. They go through most of the negatives of pregnancy and childbirth. And at the end of that, they're giving a baby up to the state where it's more than likely going to be abused and never adopted. And then at age 18 will be thrown out on the street, where they're more likely to be homeless and have addictions, have serious mental health issues than not.
Right. But then you're saying that all the people that are in the, well, I mean, not you specifically, but one would be saying that all the people in the foster system are not worth having. You know what I mean? Like,
not worth having, but I mean, no, I mean, that's the
people
problem.
Can come out of adversity is kind of like, I would rather have the option of
adversity, but I think it's a little bit flippant to say, oh, just go for adoption, knowing that that the baby is almost certainly not going to be adopted, and they are probably going to have a really awful life that, like, maybe they will come out of that adversity, but they probably won't, just statistically speaking. Yeah, I mean, like, yes, definitely, again, to go back to what I was saying, if you are pro-life, there are many things that you can do to cut down on abortions in this country, and one of those things would be to create a better system to personally adopt and foster children, which some pro-life people do, but a lot of them don't, and to try and create a better system for people at the edges. And we also face the problem where a lot of people who are facing this abortion or adoption problem are already homeless themselves, are already struggling with things like this. If, for instance, you want to talk about the intersection of the drug war and pregnancy, women who find out that they're pregnant and then want help quitting drugs because they have a substance abuse disorder frequently are not given help, are put in prison, where largely because of getting rid of the drugs cold turkey, because of the bad nutrition and the bad stress and everything else of being in prison, they're more likely to lose the child than they would be if they were able to pursue help for their problem like they originally wanted. And then if they miscarry that baby, they're criminally liable. They could be charged for murder. Those are all huge issues that we're facing, and I just don't hear enough about talking about that.
Do you think that happens often, though? It's like I've been seeing some.
It happens way more often than I think a lot of people would like to admit.
Where do you think are some good places for people to do a little bit of research on some of these stats? Like, what do you think is a good resource that's not biased? Because Planned Parenthood is their angle. You know, pro-lifer people have their angle. Where are some of the places where you're getting these stats from that you think that others, if they're interested, they could do a little bit more research on their own?
There's a lot of stuff out there. It's difficult to tell you specific sources because you're right. Most of the people who put together these sources are biased one way or the other. But there's a lot of studies out there that you can read. For the stuff that I was talking about, criminal justice, really look up after personhood amendments, look up studies. I'm telling you to read actual studies, read actual papers on personhood amendments, on shackled birth, on abortion, read a lot of medical papers on all of this stuff. Yeah, I think you're right. There's not one good source that has non-biased information, but there is a lot of information out there if you're willing to read actual case studies and actual policy papers, and more often than not, medical research has a lot of this as well. I know that we need to wrap up somewhat soon, but one of the things that I really want to bring up is, you know, you can be pro-life and be pro-choice. Just because you personally wouldn't have an abortion, and just because it makes you uncomfortable and you don't want other people, you would like to have a world where there wasn't abortions, the way you fix that is not by bringing in the state. The way you fix that is by building a pro-life culture, a culture of life. And you do that by no longer shaming single moms, poor moms, young mothers. There's a lot of shaming around all of this. Making sure that there's better access to birth control, to Plan B, which is not an abortion, by the way, although it's sometimes smeared as one. You're not pregnant at the point that it works, and if you are pregnant, it won't stop a pregnancy. Making sure those are OTC and available to everyone regardless of their age. That's a huge part of it. Making sure that we have better sex ed, and that's reproductive health education too. An alarming number of people, including our legislators who are writing laws about this, just don't understand the fundamentals of pregnancy, childbirth, and all of this kind of thing. And a lot of people in this country really don't understand many of these things. They don't understand good prevention methods. They don't understand a lot of the stuff around women's health because it's not being taught. And in many places, it's illegal to teach it, at least in public schools. That's a big concern. Those are huge parts of it. And then, you know, if you're pro-life, you should really think about some of the economic issues here. A lot of women, you know, they lose their jobs when they get pregnant, or they lose a lot of access, they get held back, those kinds of things. Now, of course, I don't support any sort of laws giving access to paid leave or having more flexible work pace or anything like that. But those are the actual measures that you need in order for people to be able to have more children. Right now, millennials, right? millennials are having fewer children than they want to have. And why are they doing that? It's essentially three things. One, they're concerned about all of the laws around child rearing. It is very expensive and very difficult to raise children because of the state now in a way that was never previously. People get arrested because they let their child walk home from the park down the block. That's a huge problem. People are scared about those issues because they think they can't afford it, because they have a lot of debt, because they look at how expensive it is to have a child, which could cost you $30,000 to $100,000 just to have that child, just the pregnancy, etc. And because they look at the cost of childcare. I live in DC, which is one of the most expensive cities in the country for childcare. And when you're looking at the fact that childcare in DC costs, for one child to be in daycare, costs more than a lot of people make in DC for an entire year's income, and then the DC City Council somehow thinks that the best way to fix that is to pass a regulation that says that daycares now have to have someone with a master's degree in early childhood education at all times with the children, making that childcare even more expensive.
Holy smokes, that's
right,
terrible.
Right. Think about that. Did your parents have masters in early childhood education?
I managed to live without that.
Right. Yeah. How could a child possibly not be constantly watched by someone who has a master's in how to raise a child, right? Those kinds of things, those are big issues. Those are big parts of this. Those are the actual things that we can do to fix the problem. You can be pro-life without trying to bring the state into this extremely personal and difficult decision that increasingly few people are making.
Yeah, I mean, I think the takeaway from this is government needs to stay out of our bedrooms. I have another question before we wrap, a final question. What has been the progress that Feminists for Liberty has seen in terms of reaching out to people that are pro-life and pro-choice? Have you been able to sort of win people over? Like, what have those conversations been like?
Sure, definitely. So it is an issue that we've talked about some. I know that we definitely have a lot of supporters who are pro-life. We have a lot of supporters who are pro-choice. We as an organization, again, are politically pro-choice. My co-founder, Elizabeth Nolan Brown, considers herself more personally pro-choice. I consider myself personally pro-life. And honestly, I think we've had a lot of good discussions with people. I think we've had a lot of stuff out there. And I think that a lot of people are actually learning something. Two of the big things that I've found have really resonated with folks is both the fact that, again, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of people just really don't understand the basic science of pregnancy, just understanding things like when you know you're pregnant and fetal development and stuff like that, and how that plays a role. I think that's a huge part. And then I also like to talk about, as a person who is personally pro-life, I like to talk about a lot of the ways that we can, if that is a concern of yours, a lot of the ways that we can help make a world in which fewer people feel the need to choose abortion without the state. So I think that has resonated as well. I also think that, really getting the word out about a lot of the stuff, like shackled birth, like forced sterilization. A lot of people just don't know that this is happening. And so I think it's really important just to spread that message and to understand from a libertarian perspective why this is so important. And, at the end of the day, we're libertarians. At the end of the day, this is about self-ownership. This is about property rights. This is about individual rights, and understanding these issues through that lens, I think, is valuable as well.
I like it. I like the idea of pursuing some alternatives that don't force someone into it. I don't know. It's kind of easy to get angry at these women, even for me. Like, I'm like, why are these just getting abortion? Like, get together. But I think you're right. The reality is that a lot of them do regret it. They're not like, oh, this is going to be so great. I can't wait to get another one. I don't know. I'd be curious to see what the motivations are. But I think without having to meddle in that, we can simply offer better opportunities for people. And then, kind of
better opportunities. Better opportunities. That's what it comes down to at the end. I don't think that everyone who has an abortion regrets it. I also don't think that people are hoping that to have an abortion. I think it's always a tough decision. I think it's always something that people would prefer not to be faced with. But, we think about incentives, and people who are having abortions for real reasons because they've decided for a number of different reasons that is their best option. And so you don't go after that by trying to criminalize them, by by essentially collectivizing their body as a property of the state, you do that by changing what those incentives are and building a rubric, building a world in which they don't have to make the same decisions if they don't want to.
Man, you're so smart. I love it when you come on this show. You have a lot of really great facts. Yeah, well, I mean, like I said, it's interesting it started out a little bit funny because we both are pro-life, but I think that the points that you bring up on the fact side are really, really useful for having a real conversation around this. And I really appreciate your time. Thanks so much, Kat. If people want to connect with you, where can they find you? And maybe they want to, join Feminists for Liberty. Can you be a man and join Feminists for Liberty?
Yeah, so, well, you can be a man and be a supporter of Feminists for Liberty. You can follow us on Facebook, and you can find us on Twitter as @FeministLiberty, or go to our website, feministsforliberty.com. We are not a membership organization, so you can't really be a member, but you can be a supporter, and we throw events and things like that, so you can definitely get involved. We're an all genders organization. We don't think that feminism is just for women, and we certainly don't think libertarianism is either. So definitely want everybody who's interested in these issues getting involved, talking about it, and sending us stuff. It's been really helpful, just people sending us stories about stuff happening or their research or things like that too. That's always great as well. And you can reach me as well. I'm on Facebook and Twitter as @Kat Murti, Murti. And yeah, I love to meet new people. I love to talk about these issues. I love liberty. So I'm always really excited to meet other people who are trying to, spread freedom and help people liberate themselves from the oppressive power of the state.
I'm digging it. Can't wait to see you again, girl. Thanks so much for joining us today on the Tatiana Show. We come out with new shows on Tuesdays, and we've got proofoflovecast.com, which is Proof of Love, the new relationship show, and that comes out on Fridays. So thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Thanks once again, Kat Murti, for joining us, and we'll see you all next time. If you have a project that needs reliable cryptocurrency data, check out blocktap.io. Blocktap.io is a universal cryptocurrency API. You can get historical prices for Bitcoin and other digital assets that you can use to build charts and do market analysis. Blockchain data is also indexed so you can get transaction statistics, address balances, and more for Bitcoin and other networks. Blocktap.io is free for personal use, and you don't even need to create an account to access the API. To get started, try some of the example queries on the homepage at blocktap.io. Hey there, it's time for the show, the Tatiana Show, where you make friends and talk life and crypto. We gotta think and reflect and use lots of intellect with our hearts when we work together. I know that it can be so hard out there, looking all around and saying that life ain't fair. So that is why we will fight and stay up late at night, listening to the Tatiana Show. What's the point of all this technology without a little love in our lives? Our hosts, Tatiana Moroz, Dr. Stephanie Murphy, and Lauren Kasovitz, have come together to bring you Proof of Love. Go to proofoflovecast.com. Thank you for listening to The Tatiana Show. Please follow us on Twitter at Queen Tatiana or on Facebook and Instagram at Tatiana Moroz Music. More episodes can be found at thetatianashow.com, and make sure you leave a review on iTunes and tell your friends. The Tatiana Show has been brought to you by CryptoMediaHub.com, a boutique marketing and PR agency for Bitcoin and beyond.